One state's National Guard in the streets of another's. The President of the United States floating using the Insurrection Act to clamp down on immigration protests. Meanwhile, ICE agents escalating the president's promise of mass deportations. There's a lot going on. Let's get into it.
Taking America back, baby.
We have an Insurrection Act for a reason. If I had to enact it, I'd do that.
Homeland Security agents ram into a car in what they are calling a targeted arrest.
Imagine being a child awakened in the middle of the night by a Black Hawk helicopter landing on your roof.
We have no choice but to do this.
They took your mom?
Broadview police chief says ICE agents are draining the resources of his department by making false 911 calls.
Donald Trump is using our service members as political props.
From Newsweek World Headquarters at the top of the World Trade Center in New York City, I am Carlo Versano, and this is the 1600.
We've become the hottest country anywhere in the world.
Nobody's even questioning it.
As I wrote in the newsletter this week, I'm not an alarmist by nature, but I do have to say that I'm starting to find what's happening in the interior of this country somewhat alarming. It feels to me like the federal government is sort of starting to act with a little bit of impunity and without a lot of oversight. There's these agents, some of them at least, sort of appear to be itching for confrontation. I personally suspect that the White House may want that because I think that it might have to do with some of the president's political agenda. But the heart of this story, the heat of this story, I should say, is currently in Chicago. That's where members of the Texas National Guard have arrived on the order of the Texas governor. Now, they're doing the bidding of the president, who wants the National Guard in that city to protect ICE agents and federal property as they conduct some of these immigration raids. I should note, of course, J.B. Pritzker, who is the Democratic governor of Illinois, says, no, we don't need them. That's so against that, the president with Greg Abbott in Texas is moving Texas Guard into Illinois. So Chicago is where the following incidents have happened just in the last few weeks. So I'm going to go through a few here. September 12th, ICE agents shoot and kill a man who they say ran over and seriously injured one of their agents. Now, that agent describes his injuries in body cam footage released later as, quote, nothing major. September 30th, federal agents repel from a Black Hawk helicopter to raid an apartment complex in the dead of night, pulling kids from their beds, detaining dozens of people without telling them why, including U.S. citizens among them. This is according to local reporting from Chicago. October 4th, Customs and Border Patrol agents shoot a woman accused of ramming their vehicle. This is one of several of these ramming incidents that we've seen on tape in Chicago and elsewhere. This woman's lawyer... The woman's lawyer is telling the Chicago Sun-Times that body cam footage that we have not seen, but that the lawyer says disputes what the officers say and suggests that one officer says, quote, do something, end quote, before shooting this woman. Same day, Chicago PD officers seen reacting to pepper spray shot from some ICE agents during clashes in the streets of that city. October 7th. This week, this is a photograph taken by a U.S. citizen showing what appears to be a federal agent pointing a firearm at them for filming as they drive alongside them. That's according to the Chicago Tribune. So it's hard to look at this and not come to the conclusion that we are veering into a scary place, right? I don't want to say a police state, but if it is a police state, it's not a particularly well-trained one. But I want to hear the other side of this. I want to hear that I'm being an alarmist or not being an alarmist, but I want to hear from someone with actual experience in immigration enforcement on the ground. So I want to bring in now Scott Mechkowski. Scott's on the board of the National Immigration Center for Enforcement. He's a former New York field office deputy director for ICE. Scott's got 20 years of experience in enforcement and removal operations. That's what ERO stands for ICE. He's done this across several administrations. He's not a partisan man. He's also got 30 years of military experience. So Scott, welcome. Thanks for joining us. Really appreciate having you on, man.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for the opportunity.
So, like I said, I want to bring you on because you have experience on the ground as an agent doing enforcement removal operations under Presidents Bush, under President Obama, and if I'm not mistaken, under the first Trump administration. That's accurate, right?
Yes, sir. Yes. That's true.
So let me ask you, what is different between what's happening now and when you were on the streets, when you were an active duty ICE agent?
Well, thank you again for having me. That's an interesting interesting question, and I appreciate the question. I think not only for ICE but for law enforcement in general, the advancement of technology, the constant news cycle, the videos, the social media platforms, okay, and you know, the same things were being done back when I first started with INS in '96, where we were out on the
INS was
street.
ICE before ICE, right?
Yes, yeah, Legacy INS. In
Right.
2003, we merged into ICE
Right.
post 9/11, and we were doing the same things. I think a lot of it has to do with misinformation. I think a lot of it has to do now with these different platforms that are pitting, both sides of an issue, and it's instantaneously where nobody is able to digest what they're seeing before making determinations. Right.
Right.
As far as the law goes, we've been operating under the same laws since I started in '96. Nothing's changed. So we've grown. Yes, the agency's grown, but so has the population of the United States, and people who may have entered legally and now are subject to removal, and the illegal population as we've seen under the Biden administration.
Right. So that's a perfect setup for what I was going to say. I think that it's worth acknowledging. I think most people would agree that the immigration system in this country has been deeply dysfunctional for a long time, right? Long before Donald Trump even came down the escalator. And I think most of us would probably agree that we need immigration enforcement, both in terms of the border, which is something the Trump administration has, to its credit, essentially solved in the last several months, right? There's virtually nobody entering the country at the southern border at the moment, as well as in the interior, right? I mean, you look at polling in this country, the majority of Americans polled say they support the deportation of immigrants who are here illegally. More of them support the deportation of immigrants who are here illegally and have committed crimes. But even, the issue of deportations is generally popular. It has majority support. So New York Times Siena poll out today showing just that. However, that poll also shows that people are quickly getting, they feel like the Trump administration is flying a little too close to the sun, perhaps. They don't like the tactics they're seeing. I think that might speak to what you were talking about how, and I completely agree with this, that, the social media, the information environment in this country is a complete disaster, right? You see clips, they have no context. It's impossible to even tell with AI now how much of these things are real or not. And we'll watch one of these clips in a second. But I think that what you're seeing, you're starting to see this thermostatic political backlash to the president's immigration agenda. So let me ask you sort of, a version of what we were just talking about, but what do you think the administration is doing right when it comes to immigration enforcement?
Well, I do think the main issue, okay, it's two issues here, right? One is absolutely stopping the flow at the border and trying to identify, properly vet who's coming into the interior of the United States and their motives for doing so. Right. We know this. That national security in this country, and we live in the epicenter in New York, where 9/11, and the other places around the country in D.C. where these terrorist attacks took place. And one of the mantras was, "We'll never forget." And so part of that is going back to how this incident occurred, why it, how did it happen? How did we let this to happen? And one of the findings was lax immigration controls, right? Even though they didn't enter the country through the southwest border, they came right through the front door on a visa.
The 9/11 terrorists, you're saying, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
And they came through with visas, and then they overstayed them, but they weren't a priority. And, look what happened. They masterminded this plot, and they took action, and it sent us into a tailspin, right? I mean, we were reeling for that for years. And so in law enforcement, we never forget. Like, for us, it's personal, right? Meaning the citizens of this country deserve to have a secure border. We're being preyed upon at the southern border, transnational gangs, the Mexican cartels. I mean, they're the ones getting rich. We don't know who's coming in, into this country. So I do think I keep hearing, well, we have a broken immigration system. I don't think it's broken. I think what happened was we were very selective on what we were doing with the laws that were enacted by the Congress. And now you're starting to see Donald Trump and his administration start enforcing different sections of law that were overlooked for many, many years.
And that's what some of the backlash is, because people aren't used to seeing this. So on that point, I want to show this video. Some of you may have seen this video. It went mega viral this week. This is an ICE traffic stop in Colorado. Take a look.
What is he being pulled over for? What is he being pulled over for? There's a child! There's a baby!
I find that honestly really, I'm pretty used to watching difficult videos in the show. I find that one really almost stomach turning. I want to get your take. So this is a video. This was taken by the partner of a man who was returning from a DUI court hearing in Colorado. So you have one guy here who's wearing a Kevlar vest over his bare chest. Another one has his firearm pointed at the driver sideways. Now, I'm not a cop. I'm pretty sure they tell you not to do that. They're in unmarked cars, right? The woman told the local media after the incident that they were trying to pull them over, but they didn't know who these people were because they weren't marked officers. They don't appear to identify themselves beyond just being law enforcement. If even that, I mean, again, like a guy who came up to me in a Kevlar vest over his bare chest, I don't know what I would think. Right? One of them is smashing the window, raining glass on the couple's 1-month-old child who is inside the vehicle. What goes through your, as a law enforcement professional, what goes through your mind when you watch something like this?
Yeah, I mean, you know, you're taking a video, and, you know, I know this will be taken the wrong way because it'll seem like I'm some kind of like, you know, just protecting law enforcement, right? But there's more.
No, that's okay.
There's more context to this, okay? There's more context to the story here, okay? The clip that you showed me, yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate, right? It is unfortunate you see this clip and your first emotion is to be like, this is crazy. But things that led up to that, my understanding is the individual was coming out of court. The person that they were looking for is a criminal re-entry case. Multiple DUIs and other traffic offense type things. I don't know to the extent of what degrees they were, right? But he was a re-entry after removal. They went to go get him outside the courtroom, gets in the vehicle, they activate their lights. He ran several stop signs or red lights. They finally got him boxed in. And so that's where this video picks up, where you see an officer coming out of the car, you know, with his weapon drawn. Tactically, yeah, I don't comment on it, but this is an escalation that should have never happened. And listen, they own some of this, right? They had a child in the car. I mean, you know, this is broad daylight. This isn't you're out in the middle of nowhere. There's people all around. I mean, you know, this is where the shock value of that video gets the American people. They don't know all the facts. The fact of the matter is that this guy put his child in harm's way unnecessarily, in my opinion. I mean, if it's me and they're pulling me over, my hands are up. My hands are on the ceiling as high as they can go. I've been taught that since I was 12 years old. My father telling me, like, Scott, whatever you do, do not escalate something. You know, comply first, and then we could fight later, right? And I think you see in this video that the woman's screaming, not yelling at the husband like to stop the car, turn it off, comply. She's yelling, there's a baby. This is all, in my opinion, I'm not going to get into what they were wearing. They were wearing stuff that identified themselves as police. They had a badge. I mean, I think that these officers here, you know, I don't know their backgrounds. I don't know, you know, what extent, whether you're saying sideways or pointed up, down. I don't know how the guy qualifies, but what I would say to you is it invokes really hard feelings when you just see a 30-second clip or, you know, a 25-second clip of just that with no background. I mean, you know, if he was to take that vehicle and flee and run somebody over, you know, that's why officers have been, you know, tempted to be run over by vehicles. And then you said it earlier that you have a situation in Chicago where they tried to ram the officers, right? So this is a trend. And I think he had his weapon out to protect himself in case, but he doesn't know who's in the vehicle. He may have not known there's a 1-year-old in the vehicle. He doesn't know that.
I think you bring up some good points, Scott, and I appreciate the context. Look, I mean, I've seen, you know, in my day, I've seen NYPD officers pull over people who have been running from them. They don't act like this, right? Well-trained police in the United States of America act in such a way where they don't exert disproportional force in order to, because they're taught by people like you, by trained law enforcement professionals, that they need to de-escalate regardless of what the subject, the target, is doing, right? If they're not in immediate danger, then they don't want to escalate. So I think that's the thing that for me is what's so hard about some of these videos. And I get that there's all sorts of context. I get that this guy is an alleged criminal, and I don't think anybody has a real problem with him being sort of detained and, you know, removal process being put in place against him. If he really does have, you know, if he's here illegally and he has multiple DUIs, right? I don't want that guy in the street, right? I have a daughter. Of course not. It feels to me like these officers are way too amped up for what's going on. And it's not just this. I mean, you know, we saw the picture we showed earlier about the cop pointing a gun. And again, you're like at a person in a car filming them. Again, we don't know the context, right? Is it possible that person appeared in such a way that this officer thought their life was threatened? I suppose it's possible. I think it's probably pretty unlikely. I think the overwhelming evidence suggests that these people are acting in such a way that is almost designed to create some of these conflicts. And that's what you were talking before about, you know, that we're in this sort of escalation spiral, right? How do we get out of that, I guess, is my question, because I don't see anything good coming from where we are right now, both for, you know, regular Americans as well as for these officers and their own safety.
Yeah. If I could just answer that, okay? Like in my career, you know, treating people with dignity and respect is something that, regardless of what we're doing, everybody's entitled to that, okay? I mean, and it used to mean something. Nowadays, you have so many people out there, the environment is charged. I mean, look, everybody that wears an ICE badge, an ICE thing, they're amped up because the environment has totally changed. You know, you see officers wearing masks. These guys, I didn't see that in that clip, but for a couple of weeks it was always this, look at these guys, they're masked up. Well, you know, the other end of that was, you had lunatics showing up at people's houses, threatening their kids on social media, doxing them, right? So these are all things that they've learned from the last time Donald Trump was the president, right? You know, if this was Joe Biden, right? If this was Joe Biden as the president and these actions, I seriously doubt it would be like that. I believe some of this it's all orchestrated to me. And never in my life, in my career, I've had people come out and, hey, what's going on? And we would just be like, step back, you know, this is law enforcement, you know, they never would say, show me a judicial warrant. For first off, I don't have a judicial warrant. I might not have one. I don't need one. You know, why do I got to give you my badge number? You're not involved in this. Right. So you see this on social media, you know, and then it perpetuates into this thing where now you have these people thinking that they're coming to the aid of these people because this is an out of control force. No, they're law enforcement actions. And I would say this before, you know, we go on to the subject is like, this is a video, and this is no doubt going to be viewed by the Office of Personal Responsibility, right? It's going to be viewed by an entity within the government, okay? And if there was any wrongdoing, okay, any protocols, any policies that were violated, that will be addressed with those officers, okay? And more than likely, if something came out of it, it would be broadcast through everybody like, hey, this is not authorized, or, to reiterate, this goes against every policy. And,
Sure.
Looking at that video, I don't know if they violated anything in the policy, but you ask me why it is so amped up when you have thousands of peoples out there getting in these officers' faces and in close proximity to what they're trying to accomplish, both at a standing facility like in Portland. Like, the law states you're impeding. If I can't drive my van out of the Sally Port, are you impeding? Yes. And so
Right.
we need to address
even if they're otherwise peaceful, you're saying.
Yes. I welcome people protesting. Do it peacefully, be on a sidewalk, out of the public street, but if I'm trying to get a van of 15 people to the airport for a flight, and I got people laying down in the street, banging on my vehicle, throwing rocks at my windows, you're endangering not only me, but the aliens, the people in the vehicle. Sure. And so, it's a double-edged sword when you say that you feel that way. The ICE officers feel the same way. They feel like they have a target on their back the minute they wake up in the morning.
Now, you brought up what my next question was, which is great, but I want to hold you to this for a second. It's about the mask. So, as you said, right, one of the big sort of debating points over the last several months is why are these officers, these federal immigration officers, masked while they're doing, whether they're doing enforcement in courthouses or on the street, et cetera. These guys in the video we just watched, they weren't, but we've seen it many times. I take your point, right, and I understand these guys have had threats against them, but I mean, cops don't wear masks, right?
Right.
There's cops in New York City. I've seen cops be harassed and, people yelling at them on the street during the Black Lives Matter protests. They weren't masked.
Right.
So,
Absolutely.
What am I missing?
Because people aren't protesting the arresting of a person in New York City that may have jumped a turnstile, or this is completely the people that are doxing people. And I'm not taking sides here. I take a stance.
Sure.
We could have a disagreement. Okay. We could disagree to disagree.
Absolutely.
But when you have people on one side that use the word kidnapping purposefully to incite fear, so that when you see somebody with a mask, look, every officer I talk to, and in my entire career, I never wore a mask. Never. My guys didn't wear a mask. The environment wasn't as hostile. Towards the end of my career, okay, in Donald Trump's first term, there were people at 26 Federal Plaza rioting, Foley Square. They incited this thing to where it wasn't good enough that they knew my name. They had to try to come and dox my family and my kids through their social media, threatening my kids. And so officers are like, look, we can't let this happen again. We're not doing this all over again. So I guess the agency, and rightfully so, is protecting their own officers. But the officers, let's make something very clear. That language that they use about kidnappings and the woman in California that says she was kidnapped by ICE guys and she was in a warehouse, turns out that her family planned. These words are purposely used, right, to incite violence against ICE.
Sure.
Okay.
No, I agree with you there. The rhetoric out there is just
it's not
abysmal.
a kidnapping. You don't have to like my tactic. Okay.
Right.
The principle is a safe arrest for everybody. And so tactics always change. The principles don't. And so, yes, I think if the officers felt like they wouldn't, I'll give you a great one. And you might have heard of this. I saw a video clip not too long ago of an agent in New York City who was in the hallway and people were claiming that he slammed this woman to the ground. Right. And okay. I view the video. Yes, he puts his hands out. He's walking her down the hallway. It appears that she loses her balance. He falls. They fall on top of each other, whatever, right? Okay. Mm-hmm. The guy receives a call from a family member saying that they've been doxxed by their neighbors and that calling for people to come out in front of his house.
This is the officer you're saying, right?
Yes, basically burn it to the ground, right? how unhinged is that?
Yeah.
If he did something wrong, it will be taken care of by the entities, whether it's the Office of Inspector General or whether it's the Office of Personal Responsibility.
I think in that case, that guy actually was put on leave, and then they I shouldn't even talk about this because I don't know the specifics, but
Yes.
my understanding was he was put on leave and then brought back.
Whatever it was, the outcome, but the principle here is that he was immediately doxxed. Somebody saw the video.
Right.
He wasn't wearing a mask, and they said, hey, this is who this guy is, and this is where he lives.
Right.
And the media
Okay.
was complicit in not reporting that. Right? They knew because it was out there, but they didn't say anything because it goes against the narrative and the inflammatory language against ICE. And what I would tell you is this, and I opened up with this. Officers that I worked with in New York City and in New Jersey always treated people with dignity and respect. We tried at all times, right? And it's painful. But if you violate the law, there's a consequence, and that's the consequence. And they're out on the street. And this could be solved if people would just understand that language of kidnapping and everything else it's not true. No one's being kidnapped.
And it's not helpful.
Right. Absolutely.
I want to let you go, but I do want to ask you one more question because I know that you've spoken out. We've covered this. I think you've spoken to Newsweek about this. You've spoken about why you believe Dreamers deserve legal status. Dreamers, of course, being migrants who are here, who were brought here as young people without legal status, who are now more or less American, right? By any sort of standard, right? They've lived here forever. They speak English, all that. Tell me your thoughts there.
Okay, well, I'm glad you kind of brought it up because it's something that's been brewing for a while, and it was kind of taken out of context. Okay, the whole that part of the conversation. Maybe I didn't make myself clear. Look, okay. I don't believe in any sort of amnesty. Okay.
Okay.
I don't believe in an amnesty. We've done amnesty before. Reagan did it with 245I, and there were several provisions in that amnesty that were supposed to happen, like total control of the borders, the ports. It never worked out. Amnesty will just keep people coming and hoping for the next amnesty and the next amnesty and the next amnesty. So, you have to stop the illegal migration. You have to stop that. And the way you do that is you 100% do not give any amnesty, because the minute you do, there's going to be more people coming. And if you follow those migration patterns, especially under the Biden administration, that's what happened. Everybody's hoping that let's overwhelm it. Let's flood the system. They're going to have no choice because, years ago you were saying you can't deport 8 million people. You can't deport these. What are we going to do with these people? And then 3-4 million more come in, and 3-4 million more come in. Now, the estimated reports, they're trying to be conservative and say there's 14 to 15 million. The answer is there's a lot more than that. I think that's way under.
People here illegally. You're saying
absolutely
right.
And I'm not
15 million is an undercount.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I believe there's way more. And then you get into this thing of whether they came in legally at an entry, at the port of entry, with a B2 visa and overstayed. We don't know where they are. We don't know who they are now. Or they came illegally through the border, right? And the issue is, this administration has taken a holistic approach to trying to shut that down. And I think that helps stop the migration patterns. Right?
Yeah, because it sends the message.
It sends the message, right? And I believe we need to work with other countries. These other countries. We need to find different ways of curbing it, right? Like I said, the people who made the most money under the Biden administration was the cartels. They made trillions.
Sure.
Do I think
from trafficking?
I'll be outspoken about DACA. The one thing I would say is this. I hated it from day one, okay? Because I kind of felt like it was easy for that administration to write it up on their way out and basically hand it over, knowing that they weren't going to be there. Like, yeah, you could deal with this. Like,
Right.
you know,
Not
let's
my problem.
right. Well, let's call it for what it really is, right? Like, you know, he gets hailed as, oh, he was so nice. He gave us doc. What he did was give you nothing that nobody could act on because it's not legal.
This is Obama you're talking about.
Yes. Yes.
Yep.
You know, so as an officer, you're sitting there going, well, all right, well, like all he did was like just give these people basically an indefinite stay, but they have no legal status. So what are we doing here?
Right.
You know, so, you know, then Trump comes in and says, well, that's it. I want to end it. It's not legal.
So one thing I know I said that was my last question, and this isn't even really a question. It's just sort of a thought. And I know that, you know, you're not a politician. This is not in your purview. So, but I'm curious your thoughts. Because to me, the situation on the ground, to me, it just seems, in addition to overly provocative, to me, it seems impractical. I mean, you're telling me if you believe there's 15 or 20 million people here that need to be removed, you're going to do, I mean, it's taking 6 guys to remove this one dude. I mean, that's not like, it's not particularly logistically plausible to do it that way. Why can't we, and again, you're not in Congress, right? Thank God. But why can't we do mandatory e-verify, right? Why can't we do a remittance tax on, you know, they had a remittance tax in the big, beautiful bill that was 3.5% remittances, of course, the money that migrants sent back home,
Yes, sir.
you know, to their families. It was at 3.5%. It was lobbying from the financial services industry. They cut it down to 1%. They couldn't even do that, right?
Yes, sir. Yes. As to your point, the Iowa superintendent scandal.
The guy in Des Moines, yeah, right.
Okay, that whole debacle could have been resolved in 5 minutes if they used E-Verify.
Right, exactly. Great point.
Save yourself about $40,000 in hiring this guy, that guy, this guy to basically say, yeah, he doesn't have work authorization. He's not legally in this country. And so it would have ended the search, right? But instead, see, this is the rabbit hole, okay? And you know, I appreciate your questions because they're fair and they need to be, you know, they need to be answered. And I'm trying to do that for you in a sensible manner, not defending anything, but talking to what I know. Look, one of the hardest things, and I want you to understand this, is that before I retired, we used to have a thing in New York City called, it was like Rikers Island, right? I'm sure you may have heard of Rikers Island. And we had officers that were on Rikers Island back in the early 2000s, you know, to all the way up to when de Blasio kicked us out of there in like 2014, whatever the case may be. But we had a whole entire unit there called the Criminal Alien Apprehension Program. And these 9 or 11, 15 officers we had were there to identify all anybody that wasn't U.S. born and determine whether or not they were amenable to removal, right? To removals, right? And that includes people who are legal permanent residents, but they've committed a crime and ICE didn't know about it. And now they're in this jail and they identify them and they paper them and they say, yeah, legal permanent resident because you were married. However, you violated your status, you're going to go to immigration court. Got it? And so, so annually at Rikers Island, just Rikers Island. I'm not talking about upstate, downstate. You know, I'm not
just
talking
the jail
about
for the city. Yep.
Just Rikers Island. Those officers dropped over 3,000 to about 3,400, 3,500 detainers annually that were complied with. So we sent a detainer over. We would get these people out of custody in a safe environment, transport them to our custody, write them up, and then detain them. So we weren't going to have to go out in the communities to do this. Got it? And then they just came and said, yeah, you know what? Nope, we're not going to comply anymore. Get out of Rikers Island, and you got to do this all on your own. And oh, by the way, you can't use probation. You can't work with the Department of it. You can't do this. You can't do that because
this
of
is the sanctuary city question. Right. Exactly. I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, you nailed it. I mean, I didn't have to say, I didn't have to give you the answer. So they knew. Why would you put that into place? These are people that are criminals. They're in Rikers Island for a reason. Whether But, they got pressure from people like the Legal Aid Society and all these other NGOs, right? And said, yeah, let's give ICE the finger. And, oh, by the way, we're not going to be able to detain anybody. So here's what happens. Now we got to ship people from New York City to Columbus, Georgia, to Louisiana, to here. Right. And then the attorneys are on the other side of the aisle crying now, oh my goodness, I can't see my client. You're making it so hard. This is inhumane. And you're like, well, easy. Just, okay, well then let us detain people here and we don't have to ship them out. And so you asked the question about E-Verify and everything. It all aligns. So is the system broke? Or are our policies broken?
Everything's broken. Scott, next time I'm going to bring you on. We're going to solve the American criminal justice system together.
Hey, you've been great.
But seriously, no, I really appreciate it. I don't agree with you on everything, but I really think that you put up what, at least to me, is the most cogent defense of some of this that I've seen, and I think that's really valuable for the audience. And it's also, this is the kind of conversation we need to be having in this country more. So I really appreciate you coming on.
I really appreciate the opportunity, man. And like I said, it's difficult for everybody.
Yeah, it's a tough moment. It is a tough moment in this country. But thank you for your views. We'll bring you back on. I'm sure there will be plenty more to talk about this, for better or worse. But yes, Scott Mechkowski, thank you so much for joining us here.
Thank you so much, sir. And thank you to everybody that put this together, Carlo. Thank you. Of course.
So I think Scott made some pretty good points. Again, I don't agree with him on everything. I think he lets some of these officers off the hook in their conduct. But again, he's a law enforcement professional, and that's what he's going to do. And I think that's totally, fine. And it's good to hear from somebody with that sort of experience. I also think, we didn't really get into the politics, but it is worth remembering that to a degree, Democrats created the problem that they find themselves in, right? I mean, Biden moved way too slow to secure the border during his term. He paid a political price for it, of course, as did Kamala Harris. Immigration enforcement during his term was woefully impotent. It reflects the Biden administration's capture by the left, by NGOs and the left wing of the party. I want to show you, this is a clip of Joe Biden in 2007 when he was running for president against Barack Obama, saying that he would not allow sanctuary cities if he were president because they, quote, turn into dumps. Take a look.
Would you allow these cities to ignore the federal law regarding the reporting of illegal immigrants and, in fact, provide sanctuary to these immigrants?
The reason the cities ignore the federal law is the fact that there is no funding at the federal level to provide for the kind of enforcement at the federal level you need. Pick up the New York Times today. There's a city not far across the river from my state that imposed similar sanctions. And what they found out is, as a consequence of that, their city went in the dumps, in the dumpster. Stores started closing. Everything started to happen. And they changed the policy. Part of the problem is you have to have a federal government that can enforce laws. This administration has been fundamentally derelict in not funding any of the requirements that are needed even to enforce the existing law.
So, Senator Biden, yes or no, would you allow the cities to ignore the federal law?
No.
So the problem here is, again, some of the president's policies on this and his are relatively popular, right? Or even have majority support. His rhetoric is the thing that is really, I think, lighting the fire that we see now that's sort of starting to pop up around the country. President Trump takes things to the extreme. That's sort of his whole thing, right? He does it all the time. He's about maximum power. He's about never leaving any bit of power on the table. And I think that's sort of what you're seeing with some of these immigration enforcements, as well as his move now to, deploy the National Guard into cities run by Democrats. The public is reacting, as Scott mentioned, to what's happening, but they're reacting to that because the president, I think, is provoking the situation. I think that a lot of these ICE agents, they hired them very quickly with a lot of this money that they got appropriated this year from Congress. These guys do not appear to be particularly well trained, at least some of them. So I think that obviously adds a lot to this. And we're in this escalation spiral, like we talked to with Scott, right? So if you have officers that perhaps acting like the law doesn't apply to them, then you've got the public reacting to that. Then you've got these cops and enforcement agents reacting to that. becomes a very dangerous cycle that we're in right now and that I hope that we can get out of. But the administration's MO here is to blame everything on Antifa, right? The sort of loosely organized, to the extent it's organized at all, group of, left-wing anarchists that provoke cops in the street. They've been doing it for a long time. They cause problems. There's no question about it. But give me a break, right? That's not really what's happening here. That's not the real problem. When you put masked, anonymous, poorly trained, heavily armed law enforcement officers on the streets of this country, snatching people from their homes, their cars, their beds, in some cases not identifying who they even are, that is going to provoke a response from regular Americans because it's un-American behavior, in my opinion. I think that there is a way to carry out Trump's remit of mass deportations that abides by our laws and our norms. What's happening right now is not it. But I welcome your feedback. You can sign up to my daily newsletter column at the link below. I thank Scott again for coming on and talking to us. And in the meantime, be good to each other, be good to yourselves.
This country was stone cold dead. We've become the hottest country anywhere in the world. In fact, nobody's even questioning it.